Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claris Community Live. I'm Rosemary Teege, Community Engagement Manager at Claris, and I'm pleased to welcome my friend and colleague from Claris, Ryan Manook, as my guest today, where he will introduce and do a bit of a deep dive on the two new features for FileMaker, Claris FileMaker Server Remote Backup and Standby Server. And just before we get started, just a couple reminders. First, if you have questions for Ryan, just drop them into chat and be sure to send them to everyone and not just me or just panelists. That way the smart people in the audience may be able to answer before I can read them aloud. And second, as we get started, please do complete our opening survey questions just to let us know what you think about what you've heard so far about remote backup and standby server, and to let us know what versions of FileMaker you're using right now. And to do that, click on the three squares in the lower right, apps, and then open Slido. And with that, Ryan, do you want to introduce yourself and then you can get started?
Sure. Hello, Claris Community Live. My name is Ryan, if we haven't met before. I've been on the product team for quite a while now, but I've been with Claris since 2008. Wore a few different hats. I was a sales engineer for a long time, but recently on the product team, I've come back to the FileMaker product. I'm super excited to be here and chat about some of the new capabilities of FileMaker 2026, particularly around remote backup and standby server. So whether you run a business on FileMaker or you build support for others, these two features are about one thing: making sure that when something goes wrong, your operation keeps moving. And here's how we're going to spend our time together today. We're going to start with a quick story that kind of frames why these features exist. We'll talk about what they are, and then I'll show you what we built in a guided demo of each feature. We'll also cover licensing and pricing, and then Rosemary and I will take some space to go one layer deeper and go into some details that matter for your specific situation. And of course, like Rosemary had mentioned, this is a community live session, so we want it to be as interactive as possible. Again, if you have any questions, throw them into chat. Make sure you send it to everyone, and I'll make sure to check in at different points, or Rosemary may chime in so we can answer your questions as we go.
Yep, and Ryan, you're not sharing your slides yet.
Oh, okay.
And while you get that set up, I'd just let you know that for the first question, which features are people most interested in? 19% said remote backup, 17 say standby server, 63% say both.
Okay.
And then just also for where people are right now, and this is a question that you could answer as many versions as applied. About 2/3 of the audience are using FileMaker 2026 already, also FileMaker 2025, a third, 30% FileMaker 2024, 20% 2023, and about 20% 19 or earlier. So we have a good spread, and I'm thrilled to see the early adopters already using FileMaker 2026.
That's amazing. Yes, that's wonderful. Rosemary, quick just logistics check. You can see my screen okay?
Looks good.
All right, perfect. So to get this webinar started off, I'm going to do things just a little bit somewhat different. I want you to imagine that you woke up tomorrow and your calendar app was gone. And not just on your phone, but on your laptop, your desktop, like all of your devices. That means your meetings, your schedule, your history, all of it is gone. Now, here's the challenge. Try to rebuild the next 2 weeks of your life from memory. Now, how far do you think you could get? Could you fill out tomorrow? Does it start to get a little bit hazier as you go through the rest of the week? And what about the week after that? How accurate do you think you could get it? Now, that thought experiment is actually based on a real situation that a small nonprofit found themselves in not too long ago. Now, this organization, they coordinate about a team of 30 volunteers who work local community events. The team schedules, bookings, assignments. It ran through FileMaker server, which was great. And everything was working fine until one day they were hit by a ransomware attack. So their server was locked down. The local environment was compromised. And by the time they tracked down a backup and got into the hands of a partner, the data was effectively 2 weeks old. And in the meantime, those volunteers were left trying to piece together their schedules from memory and old emails. So whether you run a business on FileMaker, you build solutions for clients, or manage infrastructure, the story behind that sounds familiar in some version, I'm sure. And if it does, let us know in chat if you've had a similar experience. But here's the main takeaway that I want you to obtain from that story. It's not fear, it's clarity. Because that organization, they weren't negligent. They had a backup strategy. When things went wrong, they immediately reached out to a partner, which is great. And the partner helped them get up and running and recover again. But their reliability strategy had two very specific gaps: a recent offsite copy of their data and a way to keep businesses running while recovery happened. And that's what we built. Remote backup and standby server, each one built for a different reliability problem. Remote backup is about data recovery. It allows you to automatically create backups to cloud storage. So if something happens to your local environment, which means your local databases, even your local backups, your data will now be safe off-site, and you can get back to where you were fast. And if you're wondering about cloud security, if you enable FileMaker's encryption at rest on your individual FileMaker files, you can achieve end-to-end encryption with remote backup. A standby server is about maintaining business continuity. It allows you to install a secondary FileMaker server that remains in sync with the primary server. And in the event of a planned or unplanned outage, standby server is what keeps your business up and running while recovery is happening, so your team doesn't have to stop. And by building these features directly into the platform, we're ensuring that all businesses, all developers have access to enterprise-grade reliability features without enterprise cost or complexity. And really, again, if you're running a business on FileMaker, you didn't build your solution so you could spend time thinking about infrastructure, right? These features let you make one decision, you turn them on, and then you move to things that actually need your attention. And for developers and partners, you're likely already solving some version of this already through custom scripts, third-party storage, or your own manual standby configurations. This isn't a replacement of that expertise. These features are an opportunity to extend what you offer to clients who rely on FileMaker as a business, but aren't on a managed hosting model. So with that, let's see remote backup in action.
Before you go on, I just want to, someone dropped into chat just to all panelists that your story sounded like when their FileMaker server crashed and they lost 3 weeks of institutional work because sometime in that time span, their remote backup configuration that they had made had failed. So
I'm also wondering, like, were they able to figure out like how much that actually cost the company as well? I'd be interested to hear that if there's a follow-up on that. Thanks, Rosemary.
Yeah.
So diving into the remote backup feature, actually, before we dive in, there's a couple of things I want to orient everyone. This feature lives across two consoles, which you may or may not be familiar with. So you'll see us move between the Claris customer console, where you're going to manage your remote backup storage, and the FileMaker admin console, where you will configure and manage the actual backups. And I'll try to flag that switch as we go so you don't lose the thread. During the demo, we're also going to cover setting up storage, connecting your FileMaker server to drives, seeing how backups run automatically, and then walking through what a restore actually looks like. So if you're a business owner, watch for the simple configuration and how visible the backup status is in the consoles, because that status indicator, that's your confirmation that it's running. So you don't have to wonder about whether your data is being backed up offsite safely. And for partners, developers, and IT, pay close attention to the restore workflow, which answers how do I actually get my data back? And think about how this differentiates from a homegrown script approach, like no credential rot, no script drift, no single point of knowledge that may walk out of the door, maybe something similar to what one of our community members just shared. All right, so we're going to dive into the walkthrough of remote backup. Just here. And just to, again, orient us, you'll see in the upper left corner, there are two tabs. Right now, I have the Claris Customer Console selected. Again, this is where I'm going to manage my storage for remote backup. And to the right of that tab is the FileMaker Server Admin Console. That's where I'm going to manage the actual backups themselves. All right. So we're going to assume that I've already made a purchase for remote backup and I have 100 gigs under my account. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Now, one thing I want to point out with these features, and you also see in Standby Server, we have in-product guidance now, so instructions that'll help walk you through how to configure this feature. So I had 100 gigs, but I can actually segment the storage into different drives. Here I'm going to use about 50 gigs of my total 100. So I just created a brand new drive. Next, I'm going to go to FileMaker Server, and in this section, all I'm really doing is going through a registration and approval process. So I'm just getting some information between the drive and FileMaker Server. That again is I'm going to make a request from FileMaker Server that I want to make a connection, and then I'm going to approve it from the Claris Customer Console side. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and click close there, and we'll go back to the Claris Customer Console. We'll approve this registration. All right. And then back in the FileMaker Admin Console, we have one last step, which is actually connect to that drive. So we'll go ahead and click on that Connect Drive button. All right. Remote drive is connected, which is great. And you can see that we have some updated statuses on the right-hand side. Approval and connection status is connected, which is great. And we'll see the same thing in the Claris Customer Console. Now, what I wanted to call out here again is for business owners, seeing that green icon connected, that means that the feature is now set up. We're going to have automatic backups sent to cloud, and your backups are going to be offsite safely. So that's your indicator that everything is working fine. So we have that connection status in the Claris Customer Console. Let's go back to the FileMaker Admin Console now. We'll take a look at what databases are we actually backing up right now. I just have one here, okay? And we have the remote backup feature unlocked now in my admin console. We don't have any backups right now. What's actually happening when you first make a connection between the drive and FileMaker Server is we'll take a full copy of the file and bring it over to storage and then start saving the increments. So depending on the size of the files that you're going to be backing up, that may you may consider when you might want to kind of configure this feature. If you have large files, for example, it may be something you want to configure overnight. But again, just something to consider. In this case, considering that intervals happen every 20 minutes, I'm going to do a little bit of a time jump here and give this feature some space to create a list of rolling backups for me. All right. So you can see I have quite a list of backups in this particular window. All right. So these rolling backups represent incremental changes to those full copies. They happen every 20 minutes after the previous backup is complete. Okay. So 20 minutes after the prior backup is complete. And we save these incremental backups for 30 days. So once it hits 30 days, then we'll start deleting them. And again, the list will just essentially be continuous. There's a few things that we can do here to manage our backups. If I select one of my backups, you can see I have a few options. One is I can download a backup. So I could select one or more files if I have them. There's a download button. I can download that to my local machine. If I have that backup still selected, I also have a restore option. And again, we can select one or more files to restore. In this case, we'll go ahead and proceed with that process. We'll get a notification that it's in progress. And then in the upper right corner, we'll get another notification telling us when the restore is complete. So now when I go to the databases tab, you'll see that we have two files now. And that restore file has a restored and a timestamp added to that name, just as an indicator. And here we can treat it like any other database: open, remove, download. But those are two different ways that you can get your files out of your storage. Now, we talked about the 30-day deletion, but what if we wanted to keep some of these backups? Well, if I select a backup, go to that More link and select Preserve Backup. On the left-hand side, you'll see in that Preserve tab, I now have a number indicating that I have preserved a backup. These backups remain in perpetuity, so they won't be deleted unless I manually delete them, which means they're safe from that retention policy. And if you want to make some retention policy changes, there are some options on that left-hand side, the remote backup settings. You can make some changes to how we retain backups that feature remove databases, as well as that rolling backup cutoff date. And if you wanted to disconnect a drive, it's pretty simple, okay? You just select the drive that you're currently connected to. There's a disconnect drive button. We'll see a status update on the right-hand side. It now says disconnected. And in the customer console, we also see it reflected as disconnected. Well, now that the drive is disconnected, we could connect to that same FileMaker server again, or a different FileMaker server, or we could delete the drive. Just one tip here. If you delete a drive, you will permanently delete the files that are stored on that drive. So before you delete a drive, make sure that you download any of the files that are stored on there that are important or critical to your business. Otherwise, again, if you delete the drive and files are still stored there, they will be permanently removed. All right, that's a lot of information. Let me pause there. Rosemary, do we have any pressing questions about remote backup?
We have all kinds of pressing questions about remote backup.
Okay.
So I think the biggest question is, so there's a couple kind of big ones, I think. One is, trying to think, can only selected databases be backed up to using remote backup, or is it only all databases?
All databases for now.
Okay. And there's lots of questions about size. Like lots of people are saying, I have 250 gigabytes, 300 gigabytes of data, 1 terabyte. So is there a maximum size? And can you talk a little bit about the size efficiency of this backup method, or the space efficiency of the backup method we're using?
Yeah, so we like we talked about, there's full copies when you initially connect. Let me get into this screen. Okay. But even though there's these incremental or this whole list of backups, these are just incremental changes. So they're really, really small. When we're looking at space, it's going to be that initial copies of the files, and then what it looks like from your preserve list and how often you preserve. So if you're preserving a lot of files, you may want to include like a download cadence as part of your strategy. But yeah, when you're looking at this larger list, it's really just like incremental backups. So they're just changes, not a lot of space there.
Right. And so that is true of both like the FileMaker files and remote container data as well, right? So you're not making new copies of your remote container data
Correct.
with every backup.
Correct.
Okay. So I think that covers the space question.
And we'll talk a little bit more about kind of space and what that looks like when we get to kind of like the
Yep.
licensing section.
Yeah, I think other question is a compliance with GDPR, and generally where is remote backup available?
Yeah, remote backup is available wherever like FileMaker Cloud is available right now. So we have data centers in US, Canada, Australia, Europe, Japan. Um, at the time, based off of your bills to, we'll match you up with the closest data center. We are exploring what it'll look like if you can, or what it would look like to select your own geo at the time of purchase.
Yeah, another question is remote backup health information compliant?
Health information compliant, that I'd have to get back to you on.
And for SOC 2 Type 2 ISO 27001 compliance, I assume that this falls under our existing certificates for that.
Yeah, yeah. If for anyone who's used FileMaker Cloud before, we're actually taking that backup technology and bringing that to the on-premise FileMaker server. So we're taking that cloud technology, but also if the experience makes a lot of sense and it's something that your business or your customers, if you're a partner or a developer, might be interested in, and they're also looking for a cloud deployment. I mean, this really takes you kind of like one step away from like a full FileMaker Cloud experience. So yeah, this is also falls under the same certifications that we have for FileMaker Cloud.
All right, I think only other question I'm going to ask right now, and we have lots of time at the end as well, is a couple of people noted when you did the restore that your restored file has a new name. Is it possible in the console to fix that file name?
Not in the console at this time.
Okay. And then the second one is, so if there's a group of files and they all reference each other, and you restore from backup, you would need to fix the file names for the file references to work. Yes.
Yeah, you would. Yeah. I'll throw one additional just note here as well before we kind of move on from remote backup. Again, with all backup strategies, it is important to check your backups on a regular cadence, whether it's local or it's like remote in the cloud. So setting this up is extremely convenient. It's a disaster recovery tool, but we should always continue to follow best practices in terms of checking up your files as well.
Yes. So I'm gonna like emphasize that again because there were a couple of questions about this. So this is not a replacement for local backups, right? You still want to do your regular FileMaker server on-premise backups, because that allows you to do things like quickly recover if an end user accidentally deletes a bunch of data.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an enhancement to your overall reliability strategy, right? So a great reliability strategy, you would have your local backups, and you would also have your offsite backups. So again, this is just in case your local environment, it's not just your machine, the business site can also be considered a local environment as well. So if anything were to happen to that environment, you have your data stored like offsite and far away.
Yep. Yeah. And again, I also want to just clarify that this is a service for customers with on-premise FileMaker servers running on Mac OS, Windows, or Ubuntu Linux to add offsite backups to the cloud easily and seamlessly to their existing infrastructure. So this isn't part of FileMaker Cloud. This is allowing you to do on-premise backups to Claris's cloud in secure cloud environment.
Correct.
Yes, and thank you, Margaret. Just want to add again. Ryan and Rick, and maybe me, will be on the Richard Carlton FileMaker training live stream later today at 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern,
But
US times.
I am breaking news. Just
Yep.
kidding.
All
Just
right.
kidding.
Well, let's move on with standby server, and then we'll talk about. I'm going to saving all pricing and availability questions for the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
All right. Now let's look into standby server, same approach. A few things to orient you before we get into it. For this demo, you're going to see us, again, navigate between two consoles, but this time it will be our primary server, FileMaker admin console, as well as our standby server, FileMaker admin console. And again, I'll try to flag the switch as we go. You'll also see, again, that setup process. It's guided through a checklist with numbered steps. You'll see green check marks as each step is completed. And the headline moment in this demo is the switchover, right? You want to watch how standby server is promoted to a primary role. Now, one thing to flag that you'll see on this slide, not in the demo, but in the slide, is that after the switchover, there's a domain name update that needs to happen, okay? And that's an IT step. It's not in the feature, but it's worth having a conversation with whoever manages your DNS before you deploy this feature. And then one more thing to note, if you're a business owner, by nature of this feature, this part can get a little bit technical, but the switchover is the main moment to watch. That's what keeps your team staying operational. That's what it looks like. And the standby server is what keeps the business moving. So with that, let's jump into that standby server demo. What you see on the screen now is the FileMaker admin console for my primary server deployment, okay? So we have a few databases hosted on here, and then we have a second server deployed in a virtual machine with just the FileMaker server sample. Now, in the connectors tab, there's a new section called Standby Server, and there's a server role drop-down menu. This is my primary server, so I'm going to assign it the primary role. And just like in remote backup, we have a list of instructions that'll help guide you through the configuration of this feature, okay? So we've already set the role. The next thing we need to do is specify which machine we're going to allow to be the standby server. All right, we got our 2 check marks. So step 3 is now on to our standby server. We'll go back to the connectors section and the standby server tab. The role for this one, again, is going to be standby. And now we're just going to give some location information and some credentials for the primary machine. We'll click add to primary. Okay, we have a little window change. The final thing we need to do is configure our SSH connection. Now, if you're not familiar with SSH, this just allows the files to transfer between the files and changes to transfer between the primary server and the standby server. Now, what happens when you make this connection? Again, we will make full copies of the files from the primary machine and copy them over to the standby machine. Okay, so again, depending on the size of your files, you may want to take into consideration the time of the transfer. If they're larger files, again, it may be something that you might want to do overnight. But again, something to keep in mind. We initially make a full copy transfer before we start capturing changes in the under the hood change logs. All right. So I set up the SSH configuration, and here I'm just going to show in the FileMaker server folder structure that there is a brand new standby folder with a progressive folder and a list of the files that we've pulled over from the primary. When standby takes on the primary role, these are going to adopt all the changes and will be hosted by the standby server. Okay, so all of that now exists in the standby server, so it's ready to go when we do that switchover. Which takes us to really the meat of the feature is the switchover. All right, so how does that happen? Right now we can see that our primary server is running. It looks good. So we're going to just fake an outage. So I'm going to stop the FileMaker server on my primary machine. All right. So we'll just do that really quickly. We're just going to stop the FileMaker server services and give that a second. Okay. FileMaker server is stopped. All right, and we can see in the standby server, we had a few status changes. Right now, the primary server is shown as not running, and we have a interactive switchover button that we can select. So if I select the switchover button, I have a few options. One is, do we want to do one final sync from the under the hood change logs before we start the role switch? And if you are using remote backup along with standby server, again, enhancing the overall reliability environment. If you have a remote backup that's tied to a primary server, during this switchover, the standby server can access that drive that was originally configured for the primary server to continue those backup intervals. In this scenario, we're just going to say sync now and click OK. All right, the final thing we'll need to do is restart our FileMaker server. So we'll do that really quickly. Okay, again, all this is happening on that standby server machine. And we can see we have some file changes here under the hood. If we go to the, again, FileMaker server structure, those files are now hosted and ready for access. But if you remember in the prior slide, the final piece of this puzzle is that domain resolution so that users will point to the right server. Again, that's an IT step outside of this feature, but from a FileMaker standpoint, the standby server is primed and ready to go. Uh, Rosemary, again, a lot of technical information to go over here, even though this was golden path.
Yeah.
Seems like a good moment for us to pause. And are there any questions we might want to tackle about standby server?
Yep, there are a few. Um, so I think the first one is like if there's a real world outage and the primary server actually fails, so it's not planned, how do you know how out of date the copies of the databases on the standby server are?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I should have added this. The intervals between primary server and the standby server by default are 5 minutes. You can make that change. I believe it's like 1 to 99 minutes, but that does affect progressive backups if you make that change. But it's 5 minutes. So again, depending on the time to stand up the standby server, it would really come down to um, like that would essentially be the barometer for how much data would be lost or like out of sync.
Yep. Another sort of general like two questions about what syncs. So first, does your full server configuration move, including schedules and all of those kinds of things? Is that also
Um,
synced?
Actually, I think a lot of admin console configurations come over as well. Like if you enable WebDirect, for example, WebDirect will come over. Um, I'm not sure off the top of my head if the schedule sync. So let me get back to you on that. I want to say yes, but let me come back to you that with a proper answer.
Okay, and the other is what about schema changes? So I think in this specific case, they're already running uh like dev, test, production environment using one of our partners' products. So once those schema changes are rolled into production, do those changes then sync to the standby server?
Let me get back to that. I believe it. I believe it does, but let me get back to you. I'm not sure if it's just the data.
Okay. I mean, my head says yes, they would because this is running off of progressive backups as I understand it. And
Yeah.
so schema changes do get incorporated in progressive backups.
Yeah.
All right. Last one for this, I think, before we keep going. Um, can the standby server be on another network?
Absolutely. You can be on another network, different location. That's just one of the benefits of having your standby server deployed.
Yeah. And I would add from a business continuity standpoint, you ideally would want your standby server on another network
Yeah,
because then if your local network or local business site goes down, you still have that server available
correct.
so that people can get up and running more quickly.
Final one I'll add before we move on. Um, a lot of time when we talk about outages, we talk about unplanned outages, especially when we're talking about like disaster recovery tied next to business continuity. One of the great benefits of having a standby server is for your planned outages. So if you need to do some like patching or updating or maintenance on your primary server, you can schedule that out, swap it over to your secondary server with little interruption to your end users. So um, again, you can think of standby servers as a boon for both planned and unplanned outages. All right. Okay. Now that we have seen the capabilities for both, let's talk about how all this kind of comes together from a pricing standpoint. So remote backup and standby server are available as annual add-on purchases if you have an active FileMaker server contract. So eligible license contracts include starter, max, perpetual licenses with active maintenance. And it's important to note again, Rosemary had mentioned this earlier. I believe I mentioned as well that these features are for FileMaker server only, not for FileMaker cloud. Remote backup is 120 US a year to activate, plus 5 gigs of storage. And then you can purchase in additional 100 gig increments for, again, another 120 per year. And then standby server is just $500. A question that comes up here is, what does when I purchase an add-on, what servers are allowed to connect to these add-ons, like remote backup or standby server? Like we're noted here, these add-ons are tied to individual purchase agreements. Okay, so if you have an overall contract, for example, that has a user licensing purchase agreement, a concurrent connections purchase agreement, a site license purchase agreement, the add-on that you purchase would be for one of those individual. Let's just say it's just for user licensing. And in your user licensing purchase agreement, like for starter or max, for example, you have access to 3 servers. And under the EULA for these add-ons, any of those servers under that contract can access these features. So standby server, for example, you can deploy standby server for any of those 3. You could have, again, 3 FileMaker server deployments, and each of those have their own standby server. Again, as long as they're under the same contract. For FileMaker remote backup, what we showed is that you can create different drives for different from your storage, and it's essentially a one-to-one. One server can connect to a drive at a time. So you could have, again, if you had a starter or a max contract, any of those 3 FileMaker servers tied to that remote backup add-on and one of its drives. Again, as long as it's under the same contract. A couple additional items about licensing and pricing. Supported channels right now: store, direct sales, partner, reseller. There are partner, EDU, and nonprofit discounts.
One question that's been asked a few times is, are these add-ons available for SBA partners?
Not at the moment. However, we're in discussions right now about bringing from the standby server to SBAs. So I'm currently having discussions about that as a starting point, and then we'll look at remote backup. So conversation is happening. I have some names of folks who are also SBAs and interested in chatting. If anyone else is interested in joining that conversation, let me know, because I'd love to hear your feedback as we kind of work through different concepts and proposals. Multi-year contracts. Yes, there's a multi-year contract, but no multi-year discount. So that means if you add standby server for 500 to a 4-year contract, each year it's 500. So 500, 500, 500, 500. Okay, there's no multi-year discount. And yes, prorated contracts. If you purchase an add-on in the middle of a contract, it adopts the end of that contract. So whether that's like a 1-year, 2-year, for example, it'll adopt the end of that contract. Do you have any pricing or licensing questions, Rosemary, you wanted to pop in?
There's a little feedback about the pricing. Some simplicity and elegance of this is all being integrated is great for peace of mind. There's some people who are thinking it's too expensive. Question, educational discounts.
There's educational discounts. I believe it's 20%.
Okay. So yes, so it's the same as the regular education discount.
Yep.
Just trying to see. A question of, does standby include hardware?
No.
No.
It's just like another FileMaker server like installation, just software.
Yeah, so the specific question, we cannot set up one of our 3 licensed servers as the standby server.
No, you have to purchase the add-on. So I'm assuming the question is like without the add-on.
Right.
No, yeah. So if you don't purchase the add-on, the feature won't be active. So you'd have to purchase the add-on to make it active within your FileMaker server. And then I would also just add when we're looking at just costs, one thing to think about is for most businesses, like realistically, and I'm sure there's many partners in here or business owners here who can attest to it. When you're looking at even just a single hour or 2 hours of downtime for most companies, that's more than what even the combined cost of these 2 add-ons would be. But let me walk you through really quickly what purchasing the add-on looks like. This is just through the store, through the website. Certainly, if you've purchased through a partner or a reseller, you want to continue going through those channels. But I'm just going to give you just a general, again, just golden path view of what it looks like if you were to go through the store, starting with our brand new website, which looks great. So here on Claris.com, if we go over to pricing and then FileMaker server, again, these are FileMaker server features. If you scroll down, there's options to purchase the add-ons, okay? And this is just one of many entry points to the store. But I'm going to click on Buy Now, and what you'll see is the prompt to enter your license key, because remember, you need an active contract to purchase these add-ons, okay? So again, anytime you go through the store, if you just went to the store, there's a link for, do you want to like upgrade your existing contract? You would click on that. You would see the same window here and enter your license key. But in order to view, again, the add-ons in the store, you have to enter your existing active license key. So I'm going to, we're just going to assume that I went ahead and entered my license key there. And what it looks like, you'll see on the right-hand side, Claris Remote Backup. You can select that. You can add additional storage if you want. And then you can choose the standby server. Pretty straightforward store experience. From there, you just add it to your cart, go through the purchase process, etc. It'll be added as a line item to your existing purchase agreement, and then those features would become active in your deployments. So what we shipped with FileMaker 2026, it was designed to solve real problems for real businesses. Remote backup has automatic backup intervals, partition storage, restore, download, preserve capabilities. Standby server has the ability to maintain business continuity, manages functionality through admin API. These have been tested with partners and customers. They're built with intention, and they're ready to go to work. We're really, really excited to hear about your experiences with these features. And beyond that, we have an exciting roadmap that builds on the foundation that's already really, really solid. So regardless of where you sit, the question is the same. Is your reliability strategy where it should be? And remote backup and standby server make that answer easier than it's ever been. So with that, I think, we stop sharing here, Rosemary?
Yep.
Okay. And just questions, Q&A time.
Yep, questions, Q&A. Before you do that, thank you everyone for joining us. And again, Ryan and Rick Coleman and maybe me will be on the Richard Carlton live stream later today for the extended Q&A. And I will make sure that they get the list of questions from here, and then you can also ask more there. Also, before you leave, please take our opening survey, or our closing survey in Slido. And finally, we will not be having Community Live next week or the week after. Our next Community Live session will be July 9th. And we're still nailing down exactly what that's going to be. But the general idea will be July and August are going to be AI Summer School. So this is not so much about using AI with FileMaker in any capacity. It's more about just helping everyone in the community get to a base level of AI knowledge and skills. So please join us for that and stay tuned in the community and in your email for updates there. So actually, Ryan, can you pop the roadmap slide up? Because there was a question. Do you continue these V1 or is this the final version of these add-ons?
Here. No, it's not the final version. We are continuing investment in these features, and we're excited about them. Again, we're coming down like the pipeline, things that we're looking at. I saw someone ask the ability to add your own storage to remote backup. In a lot of our early research, we definitely heard that a lot. It's something that we are exploring. And again, looking at the ability to include immutable backups functionality, that's something that we're actively working on right now. Automatic switchover for standby server. This is also something that is being actively worked on. And again, this is just our near-term roadmap for these features. We're excited about the investment we have in these.
Okay. So question about standby. And does standby server work on machines that are blocked from accessing the internet?
Like local?
I'm guessing, yeah.
Yeah, it's just network access.
Yeah, so I think it's really, as long as those two machines can connect to each other, regardless of where they are, like via VPN tunnel or same network, even if they're in different data centers, then yes, it will work. So another question is, this is, I think, another roadmap question, is now that we have this kind of plumbing existing for distribution between servers, is like a geographical distribution or like multi-server configuration on the roadmap to, for example, resolve latency for global systems.
Yeah, these are when we originally looked at these features and we brought them to the community and had conversations and did some commercial validation. We were looking at things like load balancing and mirror servers, and these steps kind of gradually were taking us in those directions. So there's things that we're looking at and exploring. We'd love to hear if there's a great demand from the community for these. I'd love to hear from you and have some more conversations.
Okay. Another question about, this is, I think, more a configuration question for standby server. Do the SSH credentials for that connection between the servers need to be administrator credentials on the standby machine?
Honestly, that's a little bit out of my realm in terms of the SSH setup. I configured it through like my virtual machine, but like anything like beyond that, in terms of rules, um, honestly, I'm not sure. I'd have to follow up with you on that.
Okay. And I'm back to remote backup. I'm just seeing what's left. Question about, I think, using Claris ID. So with an on-prem server, I don't have a Claris ID right now. Will I need a Claris ID to configure remote backup?
Yes, because it requires access to the Claris customer console, which requires Claris ID.
Yes. Okay. And yes, once again, just to confirm, remote backup is available in the EU with the data hosted in an EU data center based on your bill to address.
Yep, yep.
All right. Just if I missed your question, please drop it in. I'm looking through. Okay, here's one. What if the standby server is down for some reason? Do the files resync when it comes back online?
Yeah, if the standby is down, yeah, it'll resync once you make that connection again. And that actually like a good question to kind of tie into that, which hasn't come up, is when your primary server goes down and you promote your standby server, how do you make that connection again? Now that you have a primary role, your standby server became a primary role. A switch of roles between the two doesn't happen. Okay, so when you are on the standby server and you promote it to a primary, you don't go into the primary server and turn that into a standby, right? It's just that the standby machine is now promoted to a primary role. If if you wanted to turn that into the primary and you didn't want that, or you didn't set up that second machine as just kind of a temporary machine and you just wanted to work off of that, and then the primary comes back online and you wanted that primary to become a standby, you would kind of go through that same process that we did to configure a standby server. So that primary server, you would give it a standby role, and then you would go through that same process of setting up the SSH connection. But I believe because the file's already been transferred, that it's a faster process that second time.
Okay.
Also share if anyone's interested, or if you caught in that remote backup configuration, there was a feature called like standby by snapshot. All right, this is for virtual machines. All right, so if you configure a primary server, you create a snapshot, turn that snapshot into its own virtual machine. When you open up the admin console, you can give it a role of standby snapshot, and the files are already there. So you're skipping that SSH step. So that's another feature that's available for anyone who is interested in standby server and thinking about using like virtual machines.
All right. And I think I'm going to ask one last question. And that is, do we have any guidance on how to calculate the gigabytes of storage required for remote backup?
I I I don't have like a great calculation. Um, yeah, I'd have to come up with I have to get back to you on that one.
All right. I think that's a good question to take back to our documentation and support teams
Yep.
for guidance. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're out of time. Appreciate Ryan. Thank you for coming and leading this presentation. Thank you to everybody who joined us. And we will see you in a few weeks and possibly also later today. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye, bye-bye.